Here, this place, they have something very special, said Abdul, a short, stocky Moroccan with a mustache, thick gold watch, and an alarmingly orange and green tweed sport jacket over a dress shirt. Very special in Abdul speak, as I'd quickly come to learn, meant one of three things when talking about what to eat in Morocco: couscous, tagine, brochette. Morocco, while known for its excellent food and its many good cooks, is not renowned for its infinite variety of dishes, or for its restaurants. We were approaching the town of Moulay Idris, an important spot in Morocco's introduction to Islam, a town named after a relative of the Prophet. It's a crowded but picturesque hill town studded with box-shaped houses built at kitty-cornered angles, with narrow streets, high walls, and hidden markets. Until recently, non-believers like me were forbidden entrance. These days, as long as you're out by dark, it's okay to visit. What I was looking for in Moulay Idris was yet another moment of underinformed fantasy. I wanted to sit in the desert with the Blue Men, Tuaregs, a once fierce tribe of nomadic Berbers who drifted back and forth between Yemen and Morocco for centuries, raiding caravans, disemboweling travelers, and eating whole lamb in their desert camps. I wanted to squat in the desert, beneath the stars, with nothing but sand from horizon to horizon, eating the fat of the lamb with my fingers. I wanted to smoke hashish under a brightly swollen moon, leaning against my camel. I wanted a previously unattained sense of calm in the stillness of the desert. For now, however, I was in a minivan climbing the hill to Moulay Idris with Abdul, a TV crew, and a cluster of very sinister-looking plainclothes detectives in wraparound sunglasses assigned by the Ministry of Information in the back. A tall man in a green fez and jalaba was waiting for us in the shabby town square. His name was Sharif. He operated what was as close to an authentic Moroccan restaurant as one is likely to find in Morocco, a country where few natives would even consider eating indigenous cuisine in such an environment. By authentic, I mean no belly dancing, not Moroccan, no tableware, no bar, alcohol forbidden, no tagine of monkfish, and no women in the dining room. If you and your fraternity brothers are looking for a cool new spot to spend spring break, you can cross Moulay Idris right off your list. After a few salam aleikums, introductions, and gravely reproduced documents and permits in French, English, and Arabic, we followed Sharif through a forbidding-looking archway, squeezed past heavily laden donkeys and men in jalabas, and proceeded up Moulay Idris's twisting, cobbled streets. Street beggars and urchins began their approach, caught sight of our security escort, and quickly shrank away. Why the cops were with us, I don't know. They didn't talk. Abdul didn't talk to them. Sharif ignored them. They were just there. Halfway up the hill, I smelled something wonderful and paused to take it in. Abdul smiled and ducked into an open doorway. It was a community bakery dating back to the 11th century, with a gigantic wood-burning oven where an old man fed loaves of round, flat Moroccan bread on a long paddle, taking others out, sending them skittering across the bare floor. The smell was fantastic. Hooded, veiled women in long, shapeless robes arrived every few minutes with trays of uncooked dough. Abdul explained. "See here," he said, pointing out 3 diagonal slashes on the surface of one batch, waiting for room in the oven. "These people, everybody here, every family makes their bread. In the house, maybe 2 times a day, they bring here to bake. This mark, these marks, they are so baker can tell which family is the bread." I examined the shelves of coated dough, a few stacks of cooked loaves, fascinated by the nearly imperceptible but very real differences. Most of the loaves I saw had no identifiable markings that I could see. "Many, no markings," said Abdul, smiling. "This baker, he worked many years here. Very long time. For same families coming all the time. He can tell which bread's for which families from the shape. He can tell." The setup was medieval. A dark room of bare stone, brick, fire, and wood. Not an electric bulb or a refrigerator in sight. "Come see," said Abdul. He showed me through another opening next door. We stepped down a few crumbling stone steps into near blackness, with only a bright orange flame winking from below. At the bottom of the steps, surrounded on all sides by a deep trench of firewood, a skinny, toothless old man poked long iron tongs into a pit of flame. "This fire for bakery," said Abdul, "and for other place, there." He indicated beyond a far wall. "The hammam, sauna, where peoples go to wash, for to sweat. Very healthy, we go later. This hammam very old, maybe 1,000s of years." Sharif's place, near the top of the hill, operated for the benefit of enlightened tourists, was in what had once been a private home, built, like most of Moulay Idris, in the 11th century. It was a 3-story structure rising around a small courtyard. The walls were covered with ornate mosaics of blue and white tile, lined by low couches covered with pillows and fabrics, a few low tables and embroidered tufted stools. As soon as we entered, we were invited to sit and immediately brought sweet, very hot mint tea. The kitchen was on roof level, where a team of white-clad women was at work preparing our meal. Kefta, a Moulay Idris specialty, tagine of mutton, and a selection of salads and cold dishes. Kefta refers to spicy meatballs of lamb and beef served en brochette, skewered, or, as for that day's meal, cooked in sauce and finished with beaten egg, so it resembles a saucy, open-faced meatball-studded omelet. The women cooked tagine, sauce, and meatballs in pressure cookers over an open flame fed by roaring propane tanks. Laid out around a large white-tiled space, open on one side to the sky, the elements of basic Moroccan mise en place were arranged in seeming disarray. Garlic, onion, cilantro, mint, cumin, cinnamon, tomato, salt, and pepper. There were no stoves, only hissing tanks of volatile-looking gas. Food was chopped using the old thumb-against-blade method, just like Grandma used to. There were no cutting boards. There were only paring knives. The restaurant, I was informed, was quite comfortable serving up to 300 meals out of this kitchen. That day, we were the only guests. From the mosque next door came the muezzin's call to prayer, a haunting chant beginning with Allahu Akbar, God is great, which occurs 5 times a day all over the Islamic world. The first time you hear it, it's electrifying, beautiful, non-melodic, both chilling and strangely comforting. Upon hearing it, you understand on a cellular level that you are now somewhere else. You are far from home and all the ambient noises of American life. Here it was roosters and the muezzin's call, the ululating sound of women talking on rooftops. Sitting in a tiled dining area on comfortable cushions with Abdul and Sharif, the 3 silent coppers propped up in a row against a far wall, we were brought a silver tray and water pitcher with which to wash. One at a time, our waiter poured water over our hands, allowed us to scrub with a cake of green soap, then poured water again to rinse. Bread arrived in a big cloth-covered basket, the same flat bread I'd seen earlier at the bakery, and Abdul broke off sections and placed them around the table. One does not simply reach for bread here, one waits to be served. Bismillah, said Abdul. Bismillah, said Sharif. Bismillah, I said, quickly corrected by my hosts. A large selection of salads was placed in a circle: potato salad, marinated carrots, beets, olives of many kinds, mashed okra, tomato, and onion. One eats without knife or fork or any other utensils, using one's right hand, always. There are no southpaws in Islam. You don't use your left at the table. You never extend it in greeting. You don't reach with it. You never, ever use it to grab something off the family-style platters of food. You don't eat with it. I was really worried about this. It's enough, one would think, learning to eat hot, often liquidy food with one's fingers, but only one hand? Practice was clearly required. I had to learn to use bits of bread, pinching the food between 2 and only 2 fingers and the thumb of the right hand, the digits protected by a layer of the folded bread. Fortunately, I soon noticed that a lot of cheating goes on. Both Abdul and Sharif used quick moves with the bent fingers or knuckles of the left hand to push or position recalcitrant bits into the right. Individual styles varied. I caught Abdul tearing the white centers from each little triangle of bread, creating an ersatz pita pocket of the crust, making it easier to scoop food. I called him on it, accused him playfully of cheating while I struggled with thick, not easily folded hunks. No, protested Abdul. I do like this so I do not get fat. I am on diet. A little pile of white bread centers formed beside him. After a peek at Sharif's technique, I decided to stick with the more traditional approach, forcing my fingers to learn. It was messy at first, and one does not lick one's fingers here, as you were constantly revisiting the same communal platters as the others at the table. Napkins are rare. The bread, issued periodically throughout the meal, serves double duty as both utensil and napkin. It took me a while, but I got better over time. The waiter brought a big tagine of bubbling hot kefta, set it down on the table, and removed the top. A tagine, I should explain to avoid confusion, refers to the cooking vessel of the same name. Nowadays, since the introduction of the pressure cooker, it is used largely as a serving platter. The The tagine is a large, shallow glazed bowl with a sloping conical top like a minaret's peak. Nomadic peoples used to carry them from camp to camp, preparing slow-cooked meal-in-one fare over open fires, using the tagine as an all-purpose stew pot. It was a low-maintenance way for women to cook. Simply put the food on the fire, then move on to other pressing chores, like tending to livestock, gathering wood, nursing kids, making bread, all this while the stew, also referred to as tagine, cooked. In Morocco, if you didn't know already, like the James Brown classic, it's a man's world. The women cook. The men often eat their meals separately. Should you be invited to the home of a Moroccan for dinner, the lady of the house will cook hidden from view in the kitchen with maybe a sister or mother to assist her, while you and any other male guests are entertained in the dining area. The women of the host family will eat in the kitchen. The tagine was both boon and curse to women, in that the basic foods of the region, lamb, mutton, fowl, couscous, take a long time to cook. The pressure cooker cuts serious cooking time out of the average workday, freeing the cook at least to dream of other activities. I was getting pretty good at the pinch with my fingers. And just in time, as the next course was a searingly hot tagine of mutton and onion with green pea sauce. It tasted terrific. Dark, spicy, hearty, with big hunks of now tender mutton shoulder nearly falling off the bone into screaming hot sauce. I managed to avoid scalding my fingertips, careful to eat a lot. Portions are large, as a good Muslim always prepares more than is required for immediate use, anticipating that most important figure of lore, the hungry traveler in need, who might unexpectedly appear. It is considered an ennobling act, a sacred duty to provide hospitality to the needy. To waste even bread is a sin. A dropped piece of bread found on the street is often retrieved by a devout Muslim and left by the entryway to a mosque, as to leave food lying about like trash would be an offense to God. So I made sure to eat as much as I possibly could. The three plainclothesmen sat impassively against the wall while the platters were cleared and a few plates of dates and figs were served with more of the sweet mint tea. At the end of the meal, the hand-washing procedure was repeated, followed by a presentation of burning incense. Sharif held his fez over the smoke from the burning sticks. Abdul wafted the fumes around his neck. A silver container was brought around, and the three of us shook rosewater on our hands and clothes. The cops smiled, showing off their gold-capped teeth. It was our 9th straight hour driving to the desert. We passed through snow-capped mountains with Swiss-style vacation homes, a remnant of the French occupation, through forests and valleys across the Moyen Atlas, and down onto mile after mile of absolutely flat, hard-packed, pebble-strewn dirt. One long, undulating ribbon of asphalt stretched on and on for hundreds of miles. Occasionally, we glimpsed in the distance wadis, mesas, mountains, cliffs, great mounds of packed dirt. Every 50 miles or so, an oasis appeared. Some oases were simply small clusters of the ubiquitous sand and mud castles, while others were vast, wedding cake-like kasbahs, groupings of homes and mosques, schools and markets, small plots of green crowded around tall palms, clinging to where water passed, or had once passed, or was likely to pass again. Coming from New York, one tends to take water for granted. Here, in the desert, it's life or death. One builds where water flows or trickles. One pulls it from the ground. Some of the larger oases stretch for miles in the wide, deep crevices where the earth, thousands or millions of years ago, had split open, cracked like an overcooked brownie. I began seeing camels with regularity alongside the road, with blue or black-clad Berbers holding the reins or riding on top. I saw women with tattooed faces and the same black or blue scarves, the colors and markings denoting tribe. And I saw something else again and again in the middle of the vast, monotonous expanses of hard, waterless desert, where for 30 miles we'd passed nothing, not a house, not a single structure, no stick of wood or blade of grass to distract the eye from horizon to horizon. There, sitting by the side of the road, were lone watchers, people who'd hiked for miles from beyond the curve of the earth to sit and watch the occasional car or truck blow past them at 80 miles an hour, never slowing. These people didn't beg or wave or even raise their heads to smile. They sat impassive, watching in silence in their rags as evidence of the modern world roared past, leaving them in a cloud of dust. Abdul owned only one cassette tape, Judy Collins' greatest hits. I tried sleeping. I tried shutting it out. But in the end, the soulless trilling and warbling of Both Sides Now slowly ground me down to a state of near hysterical desperation. The road to Risani seemed to go on forever, especially with Judy exercising her pipes. The scenery changed gradually from the uninterruptedly banal red-pebbled desert to breathtaking Martian landscapes of mountain peaks, flat buttes, deep wadis, and cliff towns. Mostly, however, it was dirt. At times, nothing identified what was out the window as being anywhere on Earth. Not a living thing. Occasionally, very occasionally, there would be a mud farm where deep trenches had been dug for building materials, and a few forlorn-looking goats. Seemingly nonsensical property dividers, irregularly piled baseball-sized stones, indicated boundaries between nothing and nothingness. No water, no trees, no animals, and yet there they were, mile after mile of precariously balanced rocks. Finally, Risani appeared, a sun-bleached, dusty, desultory town of dirty streets and disheveled citizenry. We checked into the Best Hotel, a faux kasbah of mud and cinder block, the familiar combo of inadequate electric heater, mushy bed springs, and lime-encrusted showerhead. Beer, at least, was available in the lobby, along with a very special menu of tagine, couscous, and brochette. I had come to Risani to find meshwi, the whole roasted lamb so integral to my delusions of desert adventure. It had been arranged in advance over the phone with a group of Tuaregs who guided people around the Merzouga dunes as a business concern. The butcher in Risani abandoned his stall and led us down the sun-streaked streets, deep into a maze of buildings that seemed to go on forever. People came to upstairs windows to look at the strange procession of Americans, Moroccans, and TV cameras below. Children and dogs joined us as we walked, kicking up dust, begging and barking. I looked to my left and noticed a smiling man holding a large, menacing knife. He grinned, gave me the thumbs-up sign. I was beginning to get an idea of what it means when you say you want fresh lamb in Risani. We arrived at a low-ceiling manger surrounded by worried and unkempt-looking sheep. Our party had shrunk to 4 people and a TV crew. The butcher, an assistant, Abdul, and I crowded into a tiny mud and straw structure, sheep jostling us as they tried to look inconspicuous. A particularly plump beast was grabbed by the scruff of the neck. Abdul pinched his thigh and then rib sections. A new round of argument and negotiation began. Finally, consensus, and the poor animal was dragged protesting out into the sunny street. Another man was waiting for us with a bucket of water at a length of rope. I watched queasily as the intended victim was brusquely pointed towards Mecca. The man with the knife leaned over and without ceremony quickly cut the sheep's throat. It was a deep, fast, and efficient movement. Were I, for one of many good reasons, condemned to die in the same fashion, I doubt I could have found a more capable executioner. The animal fell on its side, blood gurgling into the alley. There had been no cries of pain. I could readily see the animal's open windpipe. The head appeared to have been damn near cut off, but it continued to breathe, to twitch. While the executioner chatted with his cohorts, he held his victim down with a foot on its head. I watched the poor sheep's eyes, a look I'd see again and again in the dying, as the animal registered its imminent death. That terrible, unforgettable second when either from exhaustion or disgust, it seemed to decide finally to give up and die. It was a haunting look, a look that says, you were, all of you, a terrible disappointment. The eyes closed slowly, as if the animal were going to sleep, almost willfully. I had my fresh lamb. My new pals strung up the body by the ankles, letting the blood drain into a pail. They cut the woolly pelt at one ankle, and the butcher pressed his mouth to the opening and blew, inflating the skin away from the meat and muscle. A few more quick cuts and the skin was peeled off like a dancer's leotard. Stray dogs looked on from the rooftops as blood continued to drip, more slowly now. The assistant poured water constantly as the carcass was worked over, the entrails removed and sorted. The head was removed, heart put aside for the butcher, intestines and crepine, the stomach membranes, saved for merguez and sausage. Soon the sheep looked comfortably enough like meat, save for two mango-sized testicles that hung upside down from the inverted carcass in distinctly separate blue-veined scrota. The butcher winked at me, indicating, I gathered, that this part was indeed very good and should be protected during the long ride out to our camp in the dunes, and made 2 slashes in the animal's belly, tucking a testicle in each. There was more washing, a fidgety moment during the de rigueur post-mortem enema, and then more washing. They were fast. The whole procedure from ba to meat took maybe 20 minutes. I walked back to our Land Rover, retracing my steps with my new buddies in tow. With my $100 bill in the butcher's pocket and the eerily bonding experience we just shared, they seemed to like me a lot more. The carcass was wrapped in a clear plastic tarpaulin, like a dead wise guy. I got a strangely pleasurable thrill hearing the thump as the body's dead weight flopped into the back of the Rover. We gassed up and headed for the Merzouga Dunes. I was looking forward to seeing clean white sand, free of the smells of sheep and fear, far from the sounds of dying animals. For a while it was more hard-packed lunarscape, until suddenly I felt the tires sink into softer ground, and soon it was sand, sand, and more sand, the vehicle gliding through the frosting of a giant cake. On the horizon were the mammoth red peaks and dips of the Merzouga Dunes, the real Sahara of my boy's own adventure fantasies. I felt exhilarated and relieved, considering for the first time in a while the possibility of happiness. A small sandstone hut with blue-clad Berbers sitting on couches awaited us. A camel train had been assembled nearby, the big animals kneeling and ready. We mounted up and set out across the dunes, single file, a lone Tuareg in head-to-toe blue leading on foot, another to the rear. Alan rode on the lead camel just ahead of me, Abdul still in his orange and green tweed jacket behind me. Matt and the assistant producer rode farther back. Riding a camel, particularly if you're comfortable on horseback, is not hard. I was real comfortable cradled behind the animal's hump on a thick layer of blankets, my beast gently lurching forward. I was really beginning to enjoy myself. This was exactly the sort of scenario I'd envisioned when I dreamed up this scheme. This was what I was here for, to ride across desert sands with blue-clad Berbers, to sleep under the stars surrounded by nothing, to eat lamb testicles in the middle of nowhere. We made camp at the foot of a huge dune. The sun was setting and long shadows appeared, growing in the hollows and swells of sand as far as the eye could see. 100 miles of absolutely gorgeous, unspoiled nothingness. I wiggled my bare toes in the sand and lay there for a long time, watching the sun drop slowly into the dunes like a deflating beach ball, the color of the desert quickly transforming from red to gold to yellow ochre to white, the sky changing too. I was wondering how a miserable, manic-depressive, overage, undeserving hustler like myself, a utility chef from New York City with no particular distinction to be found in his long and egregiously checkered career, on the strength of one inexplicably large score, could find himself here, seeing this, living the dream. I am the luckiest son of a bitch in the world, I thought, contentedly staring out at all that silence and stillness, feeling for the first time in a while able to relax, to draw a breath unencumbered by scheming and calculating and worrying. I was happy just sitting there, enjoying all that harsh and beautiful space out there. I felt comfortable in my skin, reassured that the world was indeed a big and marvelous place. I was eventually disturbed from my Maharishi-style meditations by the familiar sound of bread being scraped. I took that to mean my snack was ready, so I loped down the dune and returned to camp to find my Tuareg buddies brushing the last grains of sand off a fat-cooked loaf of meat-filled bread. Not a grain of sand or grit remained when one cut me off a thick wedge, a waft of spicy aromatic vapor escaping from inside. We crowded around a small blanket, eating and drinking tea, as the sun finally disappeared completely, leaving us in blackness. The camels picked their way across the desert in the pitch dark, moving slowly up and down the steep rises and dips. We traveled for about 2 more hours in near total absence of light, the only discernible sight the off-black surface of the sand sea. Then I began to glimpse a few winking lights in the distance. As the camels trudged on, the lights grew larger. I could make out a bonfire, sparks rising from the flames, the outlines of what looked to be tents, moving bodies. There was the sound of drums and singing or chanting in a language I'd never heard. The spectral apparition disappeared as our camels descended into another hollow, where I could see nothing. The only sound, once again, the breathing and snorting of our camels. After a long, tedious climb over a last rise, suddenly we were there. A vast floor of ornate carpet stretched out for 50 or 60 yards, surrounded by tents. A covered table, fabric-wrapped stools and pillows waited under an open canopy. A mud and straw oven like a giant cistern or the muzzle end of a 16th century cannon glowed to the left, away from the tents. Musicians beat drums and sang by a huge pile of burning logs, everyone dressed in the same blue or black head-to-toe robes of our escorts. And wonder of wonders, a full bar, nearly 10 yards long, stocked with ice bins of beer and a row of liquor bottles, shone under a string of electric light bulbs next to a humming generator. It was a good old time, the blue men whacking drums with hands stained blue from the vegetable dyes they use on their clothes, singing and dancing by the fire, a capable and friendly French-speaking bartender in full headdress. In no time I was fully in the spirit of things, banging on the drums with my blue pals, rolling a fat blunt, watching as one of the tribe rubbed my whole lamb with onion, pepper, and salt, and then wired it to a long pole. Assisted by two others, they hoisted my dinner onto their shoulders and walked to the smoldering, volcano-like mud oven. "See," said Abdul, nursing a Heineken in one hand while sticking the other hand into the glowing opening atop the oven. "Something very special, very hot." The Tuaregs leaned down to the base of the oven to another smaller opening and removed with a stick every ember of coal and stick of burning wood. Then they quickly sealed the opening with fresh wet mud. My meshwi went in the top, straight down, securely held to the pole by wire, placed vertically into the wide, still nuclear-hot oven, a round metal lid placed on top. The lid was sealed in place with more mud, the Tuaregs carefully examining the oven from every angle to see that it was completely sealed, pausing now and again to patch or reinforce any holes or weak spots, any flaw that might allow all that residual heat to escape. Abdul and I retired to the bar. We were brought water and soap on a silver tray, as in Moulay Idris, washed our hands, and were soon being fed with the usual array of tasty olives, salads, and bread. A thick, lamb-tasting harira soup arrived in a tureen, very welcome on what was becoming an extremely cold night. Abdul had loosened up considerably after many beers, entertaining us with a high-spirited round of joke-telling, most of which sadly led me to believe that jokes about Jews are very big in Morocco. I found that Polish and hillbilly jokes work just as well in the desert if you substitute Libyans. Finally, after about an hour and a half of eating and drinking, the meshwi arrived, stretched out on a long flat board, a blue man with a long and sharp-looking dagger right behind. Still sizzling hot, the lamb had been roasted crispy and straight through, far more cooked than I would have done in the world of knives and forks. The skin was black in places, the rib bones poking through shrunken muscle. It did, however, smell amazing, and I found that well done, while almost never my preferred temperature, although unfortunately the chosen level of doneness for most of the unrefrigerated world, was in this case absolutely necessary to the kind of hacking, tearing, peeling, clawing, and sucking the meal required. There were no steak knives, after all, to be cutting tidy pink loin chops off the lamb. The chef broke the lamb into primal sections, and then broke those down into smaller pieces, small enough to wield with a fist. I invited the chef and my new Tuareg buddies to join me at the table, and after a few bismillahs, everyone was poised to dig in. The chef made a quick motion with his dagger and lifted free a dismayingly large testicle from the lamb's crotch. With some ceremony and a few appreciative smiles from around the table, he deposited the crispy, veiny object in front of me, then sat down and helped himself to a thick slab off the other nut. Abdul contented himself with ripping steaming hot chunks of shoulder and leg with his fingers, while I, God help me, tore off a sizable piece of gonad and popped it in my mouth. It was sensational. Tender, even fluffy, with a subtle lamb flavor less intense than shoulder or leg. The whole experience, the chewing and swallowing, was reminiscent of sweetbreads. It was certainly the best testicle I'd ever had in my mouth, also the first, I should hasten to say. I enjoyed every bite. It was delicious, delightful. I'd do it again in a hot second. If I served it to you at a restaurant, as long as you didn't know what it was, if I called it, say, pavé d'agneau Maroc, you'd love it. You'd come back for more. I felt proud of myself. I'll try almost anything once. but I often feel let down when I fail to enjoy myself as much as I'd hoped. Telling people about the cobra bile you drank when you were in Vietnam makes a great story, but it's dismaying when the experience was just as unpleasant as it sounds. Sheep's balls, however, are great. I would recommend them unhesitatingly and without reservation. Abdul, the crew, the blue men and I made short work of the lamb, getting serious with our hands until the thing was only well-picked-over fragments, looking like an autopsied burn victim. When the fire began to die down, as the musicians, servers, and camel drivers melted away to their tents, I was left with Alan and Matthew and a big hunk of hash and that classic emergency smoking device of 60s legend, the toilet paper roll and tinfoil pipe. As it was near freezing now, we wrapped ourselves in heavy camel blankets and staggered aimlessly into the desert, heading in the general direction of a waxing moon. With the blankets covering us from heads to shins, we looked like lepers, stumbling on uncertain feet into the dark. When we finally agreed on the right distance and the right dune, still reasonably certain we could find our way back to camp, we sat down on the cold sand and smoked ourselves into a state that once, many years ago, might have been mistaken for enlightenment, our coughs and giggles swallowed up by the dunes. I lifted the description "a bewildering array of stars" once from a far better writer. I can't remember who now, only that I stole it. And that expression came to mind as I stared up at an awe-inspiring sky over the Sahara. The bright penetrating lights, the quick drop of comets, a cold moon, which made the rippling patterns of sand look like a frozen sea. The universe was large, all right, but no larger, it appeared, than the whole wide world ahead of me. I just had the closest near-death experience I've ever had. And I'm about to have another one, then another. I'm hurtling full speed down Highway 1 on my way to Kanto, sitting with Philippe in the back of a hired minivan, horn honking constantly, heading right up the center line into oncoming traffic. There's a water truck about 100 yards ahead, coming fast in the opposite direction, showing no sign that he intends to pull back into traffic, also honking wildly. Lynn and a driver are in the front seat, with two shooters behind us, and I'm convinced that any second we're all going to die. During the war, Highway 1 was said to be dangerous. Snipers, sappers, ambushes, command-detonated mines, the usual perils of guerrilla insurgencies. I can't imagine it's any less dangerous now. Understand this about driving in the Mekong Delta. The thing to do is keep up a constant attack with the horn. A beat means keep doing what you're doing, change nothing, make no sudden moves, and everything will probably be fine. It does not mean slow down or stop or move to the right or get out of the way. If you try to do any of those things on Highway 1, after hearing a car horn behind you, if you hesitate, look back over your shoulder, slow down, or even falter for a second, you will immediately find yourself in a burning heap of crumpled metal somewhere in a rice paddy. The horn means simply, I'm here. And there are a lot of people here today, just like us, tearing down the two-lane road at full speed and hammering their horns like crazy. The water truck ahead is getting closer and closer. I can make out the grill, the Russian manufacturer's logo on the hood. Our driver still has his foot on the gas, not slowing down in the slightest. We're right in the middle of the road, what would be a passing lane if they had such a thing here. There's an uninterrupted line of fast-moving cars to our right, with no room at all between them in which to pull back in, a steady torrent of oncoming cars to our left, and the shoulders of both sides of the road are choked 3 and 4 deep with cyclists, motorbikes, water buffalo, and scooters, all of them loaded with crates of food, washing machine motors, sacks of fertilizer, flapping roosters, firewood, and family members. So there is no room at all, should our driver suddenly decide at the very last minute to abort mission and pull out of the center. If he decides suddenly that the oncoming driver is definitely not going to yield in this maniacal, high-speed game of chicken, that he's going to have to veer off the road to avoid collision, there is nowhere to go. We're close enough now that I can make out the features of the truck's driver, the color of his shirt, the pack of 555 cigarettes on his dashboard. Just when our bumpers are about to meet, vaporizing all of us in an explosion of brake fluid, safety glass, blood and bone, 2 cars to our right suddenly open up a space for us, and as if part of some hellish, high-speed chorus line, we slip back into traffic. The water truck whips by with a terrific blast of wind, avoiding contact by less than a centimeter. And there's that particular vacuum pressure drop effect you feel when on a train that is suddenly passed by another hurtling in the opposite direction. Philippe just looks at me, shaking his head, says, "Are we still alive? I was sure that truck went right through us." He's not joking. Whatever magic safety zone our driver thinks envelops our car, protecting us from harm, we're beginning to think he must be right. There is no other explanation for our continued survival. Again and again and again, we just miss colliding, so frequently and regularly that after an hour on the road, we actually begin to believe it, even count on the idea that we're invincible, that some Vietnamese juju does indeed prevent us from slamming head-on into another vehicle. Eventually, nerves shattered, blind faith takes over, and we either try our best to ignore what's going on outside the thin layer of metal and glass around us, or we simply pray, nearly hysterical with fear and nervous exhaustion. The city of Kanto is a low-rise river town with the colonial architecture of its French planners. We check into the Hotel Victoria Kanto, one of the many luxurious foreign-run hotels one sees more and more of in Vietnam. It's stately, beautiful, with an airy whitewashed lobby, black and white marble floors, a pool and boathouse on the shores of the Mekong River, hardwood teak and mahogany rooms with comfortable beds and satellite TV. There's a business center, a health and massage studio, a very decent restaurant and bar, and an anti-aircraft battery down the street. As we drive by the gun emplacement, Lynn reminds the shooters, "Not to photograph, please." I order a mango daiquiri as soon as we check in. God, there's nothing like a fine hotel when you've survived multiple brushes with death. I splurge and send out my moldering clothes to be laundered, schedule an hour-and-a-half massage, and treat myself to a traditional Vietnamese lunch of chicken BLT club sandwich. Philippe, in a monogrammed hotel bathrobe, is already at the pool. Soon I'm oiled up on a table, half asleep, a tiny Vietnamese girl walking on my back, by now only vaguely aware how lucky I am to be alive. I'm also beginning to think that there must be a lot of penile dysfunction in Asia. There's no other explanation for it. Just about every damn thing you can think of seems to have been thoroughly investigated for its potential wood-raising properties. If your waiter or a friend urges you to put something in your mouth that a few weeks ago you never would have thought of eating, chances are it is believed to make you strong. Only desperation can account for what the Chinese, for instance, do in the name of medicine. That's something you might remind your New Age friends who've gone gaga over holistic medicine and alternative Chinese cures. They say there are sun bears in China hooked up to kidney drips like ketchup dispensers, leaching bear bile into tiny bottles. Rhino horn, bear claw, bird's nest, duck embryo. You've got to be pretty anxious about your penis to contemplate hurting a cute little sun bear. And you've got to be really concerned about your penis to eat at the Mekong Tourist Garden in Kanto. Our waiter greets us and proudly takes us on the obligatory pre-meal tour of the grounds. It's a large wooded park with a narrow cement pathway that winds and twists around zoo-like cages of menu selections. Everything here is available for dinner. I lose my appetite as soon as I see the sun bear. There are snakes, bats, lizards, crocodiles, cranes, an 80-kilo python, monkeys, and dogs. The dogs, our waiter assures us not too convincingly, are not for sale. We pass ponds where one can catch one's own elephant fish or catfish. And in the middle of this torture garden, where the cages seem to radiate fear, are cute little bungalows where Chinese and Taiwanese businessmen come for dirty weekends, their mistresses in tow. They come to eat animals that most Americans have seen only on the Discovery Channel, to absorb, I'm guessing, the animal auras at close hand before killing and eating them. The plan then, I can only assume, is to settle the check quickly, rush back to the bungalow, and endeavor mightily to produce a hard-on. The management of Mekong, our waiter proudly shows us, is putting in a swimming pool. It's a horrifying theme park of cruelty, and I'm sickened by it all. Bad enough to want to eat some of these creatures, but to want to stay here close to your victims, to lie in bed with your mistress listening to animals die. What kind of romantic weekend getaway is that? Philippe and I settle for catching our own elephant fish in a murky, stagnant pond covered with green film, a small boy helpfully pointing out exactly where to drop our hooks. It takes about 30 seconds to catch our entrees. For appetizers, we go for the relatively benign curried frog's legs, a little ground snake with shrimp cracker, peanuts, garlic and mint, and some braised bat. Imagine braised inner tubes sauced with engine coolant. We eat no animals with cute bunny eyes. I just can't take that today. Philippe and I pick at our food unenthusiastically. a strong cloud of fermenting fish from the nearby Wak Nam factory doing nothing to improve our appetites. No one should come here. Our waiter is a friendly enough young fellow, soft-spoken and attentive, but I can't get it out of my head that if I should suddenly decide to order some monkey, he'll happily slit the little fella's throat with the same friendly expression on his face. I'm in much better spirits the next morning when we board a riverboat to go to the nearby floating market at Cai Rang. It's beautiful out, the sun creating pink and orange coronas around the edges of the clouds, the light on the water hypnotic. Bamboo frame houses with thatched roofs, tall palms, the crowded waterfront of Kanto pass by. The river itself teems with activity. Net fishermen, their hand-woven nets extended like the wings of giant moths over the water, dip and pull with ingeniously crafted levers of bamboo poles. Families in sampans pass by, sampans with lone women paddling from the stern and babies sitting aft, boats overloaded with cinder blocks and building materials. There are floating gas stations, a 1,000-gallon floating gas tank piloted by a chain-smoking old man sitting on top. The river traffic gets more intense as we near Cai Rang. Sampans are so overloaded here, so low in the water, I can't imagine how they stay afloat. Boats are piled high with sacks of rice, fertilizer, produce, potted palms, cages of live poultry. And there are floating food vendors. A chugging sampan pulls alongside our craft and inquires if we'd care for coffee. He's got a whole Starbucks rig set up at the helm. Attaching his boat to ours with a frayed rope, he sets immediately to work filling our order, one hand keeping his boat aligned as we speed along the river, the other steaming, filtering, and pouring some of that fabulous Vietnamese coffee into tall glasses. Another boat, this one selling baguettes, comes along the other side, and we buy a few of those too. They're still warm, crunchy, and delicious, as good as any you'd find in Paris. A boat selling pho joins us, and soon Philippe and I are digging greedily into bowls of outstandingly fresh, spicy beef and noodles, a slice of liver, those brightly colored and crunchy garnishes making the flavors pop. I could eat here all day. Just float along and everybody comes to you. Pâté sandwiches, roll your own beef, spring rolls, sweets, all this in the middle of busy river traffic. At the market, there are floating fishmongers, livestock pens, fruit and vegetable wholesalers, bakers, plant sellers, all of them in waterlogged, porous-looking, questionably seaworthy vessels of indeterminate age. Slurping down the last of my morning pho, I'm thinking that this is living. Everyone smiles. Children shout hello and bye-bye and Happy New Year, all wanting nothing more than to practice the few words of English they know. A dessert boat sells candied mango and banana, skewered melon, chunks of pineapple, whole jackfruit, durian, mangosteen, dragon fruit, and custard apple. Boats chug by with bundles of beautifully wrapped square and triangular ban dangling from the wheelhouse, an entire convenience store aboard selling cigarettes, sodas, beer, and fruit juices in plastic bags. Women cook in woks of boiling oil on fast-moving boats, grill little packets of ground meat wrapped in mint leaves, fry little birds, boil noodles. Everything smells good. Everything looks good to eat. Looking at the far shore, I can see doorless shacks built out over the water, nearly without furniture, except for an occasional hammock, the glow from a much-repaired television set. There are television aerials over medieval-style privies built out over the water. Watch the shore and you see every stage of domestic river life, mothers bathing their children, pounding laundry, scrubbing their woks in the brown water, laying out circles of rice paper to dry on rooftops, fastidiously sweeping their tiny, primitive abodes, every inch clean and squared away. It's something I'm seeing everywhere in Vietnam. What makes its food so good, its people so endearing and impressive? Pride. It's everywhere. From top to bottom, everyone seems to be doing the absolute best they can with what they have, improvising, repairing, innovating. It's a spirit revealed in every noodle stall, every leaky sampan, every swept and combed dirt porch and green rice paddy. You see it in the mud-packed dikes and levees of their centuries-old irrigation system, every monkey bridge, restored shoe, tire-turned sandal, litterless urban street, patched roof and swaddled baby in brightly colored hand-knit cap. Think what you want about Vietnam and about communism and about whatever it was that really happened there all those years ago. Ignore, if you care to, the obvious that the country is, and was always, primarily about family, village, province, and then country. That ideology is a luxury few can afford. You cannot help but be impressed and blown away by the hard work, the attention to detail, the care taken in every facet of daily life, no matter how mundane, no matter how difficult the circumstances. Spend some time in the Mekong Delta and you'll understand how a nation of farmers could beat the largest and most powerful military presence on the planet. Just watch the women in the rice paddies, bent at the waist for 8, 10 hours a day, yanking bundles of rice from knee-deep water, then moving them, replanting them. Take a while to examine the intricate interlock system of Stone Age irrigation, unchanged for hundreds and hundreds of years, the level of cooperation necessary among neighbors simply to scratch out a living, and you'll get the idea. These people survived bombing, strafing, patrols. They outwitted the CIA, the NSA, satellites, AWACS, blacked-out C-130 cargo planes that have been tricked out with sensors and Gatling guns, staffed by whole teams of airborne intelligence analysts searching the ground below on winking monitors, B-52 strikes, hired killers, special units of counter-terror teams, regime after regime of clannish leaders who cared nothing for them. They survived the Beverly Hillbillies and Bob Hope and the worst that America's lusts and America's culture had to offer. They beat the French, they beat the Chinese, they beat the Khmer Rouge, and they'll survive communism too. 100 years from now, the commies will be gone. Like us, another footnote in Vietnam's long and tragic history of struggle, and the rice paddies of the Mekong Delta, this market, and this river will look much as they look now, as they looked 100 years ago. I like it here. I like it here a lot. I'd only been to Tokyo once before, but I knew that as soon as I hit the ground, I'd be tapping into that main vein again, a dead-bang, surefire King Hell rush. For me, Tokyo is like one long film trailer, one of those quick-cut, fast-moving highlight teasers for a noisy action flick with only the best parts shown, in molar-shaking, heart-pounding surround sound, the pace getting quicker and quicker, the action more frenzied, leading up to sudden blackness and the promise of more excitement to come. No place I've ever been or even heard about is as guaranteed to cause stimulation in the deepest pleasure centers of a cook's brain. No cuisine, broadly speaking, makes as much sense. The simplest, cleanest, freshest elements of degustatory pleasure, stripped down and refined to their most essential. Unlike Tokyo's streets and much of its popular culture, the traditional sectors of food and relaxation are austere, uncompromising, devoid of all distraction and repetition, beautiful in the manner of a single long-stemmed calla lily, unknowable, serene. The Japanese, hard-working, hyper-regimented, obsessively well-scrubbed, and painfully repressed, live lives of powerful, even lurid imagination and fantasy. Over the centuries, they've given a lot of serious thought as to what exactly is needed and desirable in the taking of pleasure. The unnecessary, the extraneous, the redundant, the less than perfect, these are discarded. What is left is often an empty room, a futon, a single perfect flower. Their streets may be noisy, riotous Mobius strips of flashing lights, screaming jumbotrons, rank after rank of tightly constrained, identically dressed humanity. This year, all young women will dye their hair red. Their TV variety shows insanely over-the-top hysterical assaults by breakdancing reindeer, hyperactive hosts, cloyingly cute, fluffy, psychedelic cute animal characters, and doll-eyed cartoon heroines. Their porn, some of the ugliest, most brutal, and most disturbing on earth. Their popular sexual obsessions may make even the Germans look well-adjusted, and they may indeed teach their schoolchildren that all that nasty World War II nonsense never really happened. But from a cook's perspective, who cares? I was there to eat. When it comes time to sit at a table or take a long weekend relaxing in the countryside, no one on earth has figured out things so well or so thoroughly as the Japanese. It's all about fish, 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 Daddy-o. You like fish, you'll love Japan. They've scoured the world's oceans looking for good stuff to eat, and they'll pay anything for the good stuff. I watched my friend Taka at Sushi Samba in New York unhesitatingly pay over $80 a pound wholesale for a hunk of otoro. I actually get high walking through their fish markets. My pulse quickens even thinking about them. I missed a lot last time I was in Japan. I wasted a lot of time working and wandering blindly about. Early on, I'd been intimidated by the strangeness, the crowds, the different language. I'd been reluctant at first to throw myself into it, to plunge right into packed noodle joints and businessmen's bars. This time, I was determined, at the very least, to miss less. My quest for the perfect meal would be put on hold. This was Japan. I knew I'd be getting a lot of perfect meals here. That's what they do. I was staying at the Hotel Tatashina in Shinjuku, a tacky businessman's lodging on a side street. My dollhouse-sized room had a hard but comfortable bed, cheap bureau, a TV set, and a pillow that sounded and felt as if it were filled with sand. The walls were thin. Outside the room was a bank of vending machines selling my brand of cigarettes, coffee, Asahi beer, and plastic cards for the porno channels. I showered in the hermetically sealed bath pod, dressed, and walked in the rain to Kabuki-cho, taking a hard right off a neon and billboard-lined street, ducking through a quiet Shinto shrine and into a bustling warren of pachinko parlors, hostess bars, pantyless coffee shops, yakitori joints, and whorehouses. Turning onto the Golden Guy, things were even narrower, and the streets were bordered by tiny 1- and 2-table bars. Above, through a tangle of fire escapes, power lines, and hanging signage, skyscrapers winked red. Welcome to Tokyo. I squeezed into a phone booth-sized place, past a bank of glowing hibachis, sat down, and ordered a draft beer. A hot towel arrived with my beer. I ordered pickles and crudités with miso paste, a bowl of onsen tamago, a soft-boiled egg with mountain potato and seaweed, cooked collar of yellowtail with radish, some chicken wings, stuffed shiitake mushrooms, and some roasted ginkgo berries. Life was good again. I woke up early and bought a hot can of coffee from the vending machine. Out front of the Tatashina, I met my fixer translator, Michiko, a pretty, smartly dressed, extremely capable young woman the TV people had hooked me up with. Behind the wheel of a rented van was Shinji, my driver, a long-haired guy in a Yankees cap. Both spoke excellent English, and Shinji was completely up to date on his Yankee stats and recent trades, so I knew I was in capable hands. On the ride to the Ginza district, Michiko kept up a steady stream of patter on a slim silver cell phone, making arrangements, while Shinji and I worried over the implications of a possible brocious trade. This time around, I had a definite agenda. At the top of my list was Edomae sushi. Edo is the old name for Tokyo, and the term Edomae, when used with the word sushi, implies that it's old school, Edo style, the unvarnished grandmaster version of sushi, in a culture where sushi is already revered. Michiko had introduced me to Mr. Kiminari Togawa, the chef-owner of the Karaku restaurant in the expensive Ginza district and a master of Edomae sushi. While I had visited the awe-inspiring, life-changing mother-of-all fish markets before, this time I would be going with an expert. The plan was to meet Togawa-san at his restaurant, run over to Tsukiji to do his day's shopping, then return to his restaurant and eat myself silly. I've written about Tsukiji in the past and used up most of the superlatives I can think of. Just take my word for it. It's the Taj Mahal, the Colosseum, the Great Pyramid of seafood. All that unbelievable bounty spread across acres and acres of concrete, wriggling and spitting from tanks, laid out in brightly colored rows, carefully arranged like dominoes in boxes, skittering and clawing from under piles of crushed ice, jockeyed around on fast-moving carts, the smell of limitless possibilities, countless sensual pleasures. I'm inadequate to the task of saying more. There is nowhere else, believe me. This time, instead of simply gaping slack-jawed, I was doing it right. Mr. Togawa was with me, and when the fish sellers saw him coming, it got their attention. A friendly but serious fellow of about my age, Togawa-san was looking for a few select items today. Fresh live eels, live octopus, sea bream, tiger prawn, and otoro, the best of the tuna, in season. We spent a lot of time yanking living creatures out of fish tanks and examining them. Mr. Togawa showed me something I hadn't seen before. Lifting a flipping and flopping sea bream out of a tank, he took a knife and whacked it behind the head with the blade. The cut opened it up just enough to expose the spine. Mr. Togawa quickly took a long, thin wire and inserted it into the fish's marrow, running it up and down its length like a deep root canal. He explained that he was basically paralyzing the sea bream. The fish would live in a coma-like state of suspended animation until the very last second back in Mr. Togawa's kitchen when he'd finished the job. Walking down one of the busy aisles, the chef caught sight of a large square of fatty toro, and he veered over to examine it more closely. After gazing at it reflectively for a while and a little discussion with the fishmonger, the piece of tuna went in a bag. We bought a few kilos of very lively eels, an octopus, which very reluctantly released its grip on the glass walls of its tank, some brightly colored prawns, then headed back to Ginza. The chef's cooks were waiting for us when we arrived, and they immediately fell on the morning's shopping. They salted and pounded the octopus for slow cooking in mirin, rice wine, then butchered the tuna and sorted various parts for different purposes. The small, stark cellar space was soon filled with the smell of steaming rice and freshly grated ginger and wasabi. There came the sound, beautiful really, almost musical, of a very sharp knife cutting through the tiny pin bones of very fresh fish, the blade scraping quickly along the spine with an extended zip. The cook's blades moved confidently through the eels, then finished off the sea bream with that distinctive sound. Zip, zip. I sat at the sushi bar watching them work, until embarrassed by my growling stomach, I withdrew to a table. Finally, as 0 hour approached, Michiko, Shinji, and I took our places in a small private tatami room. Hot towels and cold beer were served. Then one of the doors slid open, and we were off. Octopus with fresh wasabi, the color and shape of a cherry blossom, came first. Then grilled sardine with ponzu sauce and yuzu, the flavor electric, dazzling, followed by a platter of traditional sushi, each piece, as should be the case with edamame sushi, containing a nearly identical number of grains of rice, and as is also the style with edamame, still warm and more loosely packed than the cold, gluey rice cakes you might be used to. I'd watched Mr. Tagawa make some of these earlier for another customer. His hands flew, twirled, an entire ballet with 10 digits. It had taken him, he told me, 3 years during his training and apprenticeship just to be considered as having mastered rice alone. For 3 years in his first kitchen, it had been all he'd been allowed to touch. Half-beak came next, a pointy-nosed, translucent little fish, silvery and alive-looking. Then maguro, the lean section of a tuna, marinated 12 hours. Tiger prawns, flounder, otoro, all served over the sticky yet fluffy rice, which was still warm. Everything, every fish except the toro, was from the Tokyo area. All of it was of the absolute highest quality. No price is too high for the best fish, and with edamame sushi, one always buys the best. The meal continued in an uninterrupted flow of delights. A miso soup with tiny steamed cockles, a course of pickles and microgreen salad, a slice of hamago, omelet, big shell, whatever that is, abalone, sea eel. Was the meal over? No way. A tray of hand rolls came next. Sea cucumber, arc shell, more eel, dried radish with powdered dried king prawns, chopped toro with fresh chives. Bigger hand rolls arrived, each containing tamago, egg, shiitake and cucumber, accompanied by a plate of dried then pickled daikon. The sea bream appeared, squeaky fresh. It seemed alive on my plate. Then we were served a little bowl of butterfish roe poached in court bouillon, some luxuriously portioned uni, sea urchin roe. The screen slid back and Mr. Tagawa joined us with a jumbo-sized bottle of frozen sake. He sat down and poured me a glass of frozen, delicious, slushy goodness. In keeping with local custom, I poured back, returning the favor. This usually initiates a lengthy back and forth, and that day was no exception. Just when the beer and the frozen sake had combined to give us all mild, blissful grins, a final dish arrived. A few pieces of that incredible otoro, lightly seared, still raw in the middle, with a subtle sweet and sour sauce. Perfect. Perfect. The best sushi ever. The best. Far and away. Let me repeat. The best, finest, freshest, best prepared sushi meal I've ever had. It took every bit of discipline I had not to moan and giggle and gush throughout the meal.